listeners, my name is Jamie and welcome to the Gauntlet Podcast. I'm joined by my co-host Shane. Hi Shane!
Hi Jamie, I'm so excited to be here.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad we're co-hosting today together. It's going to be fantastic. For this month, we have our very special guest, Blake Ryan, longtime member of the Gauntlet. We're so happy to have you here, Blake.
G'day all, it's good to be here.
It's almost the Australian-themed episode.
That's true. We're almost like at similar time zones. It was the easiest time for me to set up the meeting today. So that was fantastic. Yeah, so before we get into it, Blake, I'd love it if you could introduce yourself to our listeners, let them know a little bit more about you.
Alright, g'day, I'm Blake Ryan, he, him. I've been playing with the Gauntlet since 2017 and role-playing games generally since like 89. I've got a couple of PBTA games on each drive-through, which is Season of Dreams and Don't Pay the Ferryman. But yeah, I love listening to AP and playing with the Gauntlet. It's good fun.
Awesome. And we're so happy to have you here this month. For our listeners, if this is your first time listening, our first segment, each of us goes over the RPGs that we got to play in May and June, and we talk about one of them in depth. We get to choose one that we really want to get into. And especially we talk about the games that we got to play on the Gauntlet calendar. So, Shane, let's start with you. How was your May and June gaming?
Yeah, it was pretty great actually. Off the Gauntlet, I finished up a year-long campaign of Monster of the Week. That was pretty satisfying. And I got to play If You're Lost, You Can Look and You Will Find Me time after time, which is definitely my pick for the best title for a role-playing game this year. That was really fun. On the Gauntlet, I ran Trophy Gold, Apocalypse Keys, Brindlewood Bay, Pasión de las Pasiones, and The Between. And I got to play in #iHunt, Hearts of Wulin, The Great Soul Train Robbery, Wander Home, and Unincorporated. I think those were probably my two busiest months ever on the Gauntlet or in gaming in my life ever. It was really exciting, really fun. The game that I want to talk about is Brindlewood Bay. I realise that listeners probably are very familiar with Brindlewood Bay, that it may not need more discussion on the Gauntlet podcast, but I was really happy to finish out a 12-week run in May. It was my first time running a sort of longer form game on the Gauntlet, and that was really exciting for me. I had fantastic players all the way through. David S. and Elizabeth Hurley were there from start to finish, and other players sort of rotated through, which was really exciting.
Oh, cool, yeah.
What is it? Again, I think people probably know, but it's a PBTA game about a group of elderly women who are mystery novel fans and keep getting caught up in actual murders. And as they solve these murders, one by one, like Murder, She Wrote kind of style, they slowly uncover an eldritch conspiracy. And that's the kind of longer game that we finished up at the end of the 12 weeks.
You said you played it for 12 weeks. Did you find the game was sort of as good at the end as at the start, or...?
Oh, yeah. I think that it works really well in that every phase of it has its own charm, and early on you're doing these things that are more narrowly cozy mysteries that supernatural elements start to seep in around the edges, but you're mostly playing out these quite low-key, chill, fun, charming stories. Mm-hmm. And that's really fun. And then by the end, there's still that cozy element, but you're very much embroiled in this horrifying conspiracy, and that also obviously has its own charm, but I wouldn't say either is better than the other, and the way that they fit in together I think is really satisfying and exciting. Mm-hmm. Another thing that I really like about the game, and also, Blake, I know that you're going to be talking about The Between, which is another game by Jason Cordova. I really like the strong camp sensibility in both of these games. I was sort of reflecting that obviously there are a lot of queer game designers in the indie space, but I think there's not a lot of games that have a strong camp sensibility that comes through.
Good point.
If listeners have ideas about that, I would love to hear what are some examples of where I'm wrong there. And yeah, it also made me reflect that, maybe part of the big sort of queer following that D&D has is that it has this very unintentional low camp quality that I think maybe is a big part of its appeal. But anyway, the things that I wanted to single out that Brindlewood Bay does well, particularly from the keeper's point of view in Brindlewood Bay, the mysteries in the game are just so efficient in the information that they give you, and it really makes you come across like a much better games master than you actually are, or better keeper. There was one week where we were doing stars and wishes, and one of the players' star sort of singled out, Shane, I really appreciate how much prep you do. And it was one of those moments where I kept my mouth shut, but I was like, actually, I read the mystery about 15 minutes before we start. But the the efficiency of the information and how useful that information is and how effective it is in play is so striking that it really seems like I was doing more work than I was. And that is exactly what I want from a game that I'm running. And Blake, you sort of touched on this, but I really like the broader campaign structure that the game has. Especially since I started playing on the Gauntlet, I've been thinking a lot about how to bring a game to a satisfying ending, like how you put a satisfying conclusion on a game. And I think that the campaign structure in this and the Between have a really interesting approach to that. Both of them have this kind of mechanically structured foreshadowing that happens that builds to a conclusion. Both of them, the Keeper gets this worksheet for the campaign structure. In Brindlewood Bay, it's the Dark Conspiracy. And I really felt almost like I had my own character sheet or playbook that I was filling in and where I was leveling up as we go, because in Brindlewood Bay, as you accumulate what are called void clues, a certain number of clues unlocks different moves the GM can make. And I really felt, they've got 10 void clues. It's like when my 5th level wizard could finally take Fireball or something. It was so exciting to progress in that way. So I think it's really a really fun game to run as well.
Did you find does the game prompt the Keeper to ask the players to source the detail and flesh out things, or is it more, no, this void clue is written and it's exactly the same in every time you run it?
I mean, there's a bit of both. All the locations in the adventures, in the mysteries, have paint the scene prompts that ask the players to flesh out some of the details. The void clues specifically, those do come in lists with each mystery, so that the Keeper's kind of selecting from a list of what's appropriate. Mostly the clues in Brindlewood Bay do come from a lengthy list that the Keeper chooses, but there are circumstances where a player gets to make up their own clue as well, which can be fun.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of room for interpretation, because I also got to run around 12, 14 sessions of Brindlewood Bay twice, once on the Gauntlet and once off. Even though I used the same mysteries with the second run, and even used some of the same void clues, it still came out completely differently.
Yeah.
Right? The story diverged so much, who were the NPCs that were more involved, how were the void clues contextualized, so it's really, really interesting.
One thing that I noticed is that one of the players in particular was explicit that they really wanted to push into that dark conspiracy element to build into the void clues faster. The GM has a lot of flexibility to adjust that, to, move more quickly towards the big occult Lovecraftian conspiracy ending, or to move more slowly. So I was pushing quite fast, and I think in some ways, I had a really good time, but I think that was sort of a mistake because it made the end game less dangerous because you have this crowns mechanic. So if people don't know, in Brindlewood Bay, when you roll a move, if you're unhappy with your result, you can upgrade it by putting on a crown, and that can involve either narrating a sort of memory or a flashback or a scene about your life as an older woman, or it can involve doing something kind of mysterious and occult that lets you upgrade your result. But it also acts ultimately as a kind of hit point track because your last crown is that you're retired from play.
Right.
And it would have been, I think, in some ways more exciting to take a slower pace so that they had less crowns left when they got to that big mystery at the end. Because they got to that void mystery and they still had a bunch of crowns and could put them on.
Oh, really?
Maybe I'm over-egging it a little bit, but they had a lot to play with.
I guess it really depends, right? How important this role is.
Yeah.
And how important this moment is.
Oh, what I'm less sure about, look, one thing that has pained me every time I've introduced a new player to this game is on the list of looks, one choice is Dorothy's Bornak. And every time someone has said, who's Dorothy's Bornak? And it just hurts my heart.
Ooh, painful, painful.
If any listeners are unfamiliar, please just type Dorothy's Bornak into YouTube. You will get dozens upon dozens of examples. Look, I've done it now. The best of Dorothy's Bornak, 13 times Dorothy's Bornak let comebacks fly, 11 times Dorothy's Bornak was savage AF. Dorothy's Bornak, B. Arthur's character from the Golden Girls, just absolutely classic, please.
Absolute icon.
Absolute icon.
Such a queen.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really well-designed game. I don't think there's much that I have to say in terms of things that I'm less sure about. My takeaway, I really recommend this game to players. It is a joy to run. If you are looking for a game to run, I think it's really fun. And I definitely look forward to running it again. I'm hoping to get it back on the calendar later this year sometime.
Thank you, Shane, for talking about Brindlewood Bay. I'm always happy to talk about Brindlewood Bay.
We all love Brindlewood Bay.
So, Blake, how about you? How was your May and June gaming? What were you up to?
Off Gauntlets, a fair bit of Minecraft with the Caves and Cliffs update. Everything got sort of jigged, and it was good fun. A bit of Cluedo, the board game, just detective fun. Getting my son into that. But on Gauntlet, quite a bit of trophy gold. I played in Shane and Mike's games, which were different because their keeper style is different, so it was good to see the contrast. Iron Sworn, The Between, and Trophy Dark, which was of course a one shot and lots of fun. But what I'm excited to talk about is The Between, because I loved it. Really good fun. So, for people that don't know, it's sort of Victorian England through a supernatural lens. You're investigating, supernatural events and hopefully trying to fix them when you're not indulging your vices and interacting and exploring London in different ways. The characters have sort of special powers and skills, but they're not hyper-competent or, super powered. One thing that's sort of recurring through it is they don't know a lot about the universe or each other. They're just doing their best to fix things. Some media touchstones that I think about would be like The Irregulars, a Netflix series, and From Hell, the movie with Johnny Depp and I think it was Heather Graham, with the tone of Hemlock Grove and Penny Dreadful. It's a horror series I've seen twice now because it's just wonderful. The thing that comes to mind is, the characters, they're not perfect and they're not invulnerable. They're dealing with stuff and there's plenty of room for sort of emotional drama and flailing about their life but still trying to save the world.
Yeah, because I got to play that game with you, which Shane ran, and we're going to continue it this month, which I'm really excited about.
Yep.
I really enjoyed how so much of the playbooks really leaned into the vulnerabilities of the characters. It was very, very easy to fall into that in a really interesting way. Did you feel the same about the vessel when you were playing them?
It's automatically my favourite playbook. I loved it. When you're reading the moves, like the style and the tone is baked into every single move, and it's like, I'm reading and I'm like, this is Penny Dreadful. This is just straight up, this is a big homage to that. It's really great. Well, if you like that sort of thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think the playbooks are so flavorful and exciting. I mean, I'm definitely the sort of person who normally reads a new game and thinks about whether I want to run it. But I definitely read this and certainly I wanted to run it. I am running it, but also I was like, I want to play in this game. I want to be the undeniable. I want to be all the playbooks.
Oh my
are so
gosh,
great.
I will run it for you, Shane. No problem.
Oh my God, please.
Yes. We'll talk about this after the podcast.
All right.
I had mixed feelings as I was running it because it's so well crafted. It's like a 4-star or 5-star game, and I don't want to do it and only do like a 3-star experience. The game deserves better than that. So I'm like, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to make sure I do a good job because it deserves a good effort sort of thing. The one thing both in Penny Dreadful and The Between is you're not allowed to talk about your past unless the game prompts you to. So it makes you want to have interpersonal scenes and duet scenes with other characters. So you're uncovering the mystery of what's happening, but you're also uncovering who are these people you're sharing your lives and these dangerous situations with, which is great. As you're learning about the other characters, you're not finding out how they're linked to the plot. You're finding out who they are and how they've got to this situation in their life. So it feels more natural group of people rather than something really contrived where it's like, oh, this is predictable. None of that. It's quite fresh narrative meat every session.
I mean, I think that's such a smart approach. I've run so many games where at the start of the first session, everybody reads off their backstory that they've crafted.
Right.
Sometimes 20 pages. Well, probably they haven't read that off. They've just emailed it to me as the game's master to read.
Yeah.
After the first session, it just never comes up again. Whereas this game, there will be none of that, and every single piece of backstory that comes up in the game is going to directly drive the plot and be relevant.
Yeah, I agree.
It's definitely quite a lot of fun. It all feels really sort of Victorian era. There's no, steam-powered golems running around or modern computers in the back room or nothing. So while it's not 100% the attitudes of the Victorian era, which were pretty horrible and archaic in some circumstances, but the general feel and the vibe of the architecture and the clothing, some of the clothing I had to look up because I'm like, what the hell is a coiffeur and all this sort of stuff? And I'm like, I've got no idea how to go Google that. But yeah, so there's no anachronisms, but it's definitely a Victorian vibe. Things I wasn't as sure about. The unseen was a bit weird, and it was our first go, so we didn't exactly master it. But in a lot of games, you have narrative callbacks to things, and then they link to the plot, whereas this is more for a cinematic effect. Like, the curtains might be blood red in the unseen, and then later on, you try and weave it into a scene where you see like a blood red tablecloth or something like that. So it helps the vibe and the feel, but it's not actually linked to the plot. And I haven't seen that in other games. Maybe that's just my narrow exposure, I don't know. But we could have done that better. But I mean, it was our first go of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is quite a new idea. Do you want to explain for the listeners like what the unseen is and how it works?
From memory, it's a piece of London, and you all take turns fleshing out something about that scene. And it's not necessarily related to the plot as much as something in the background of the city you're working in. So you're fleshing out the setting but not the plot, which is odd. It's not bad, it's just different. I haven't seen it in other games.
Mm-hmm.
That was the only thing there was a bit of a learning curve. I think will come with more play, whereas pretty much everything is like, this makes sense straight away. We can implement this and run with it. The vibe I got is when you were playing investigators from Hargrave House, but it always seems like it was safe. No matter what happens, you can come home. Again, that may have just been because I've only played a couple of sessions and there might be more attacks on the house or whatever later, and I kind of hope there is, because it doesn't make sense to have a narratively safe spot.
Blake, I don't want to spoil anything, but you need not be concerned that Hargrave House is too safe.
Yeah.
That sounds so ominous and delightful. Fantastic.
No, that's good. Again, referring to Penny Dreadful, in Season 2, there's a few times where the bad guys are literally in their house, and they're like,
right.
We need to change how we're doing things, because this, they're running down the corridor towards us and stuff. It's not good, so that is good news. So the takeaway is, I want more. I'd happily make this a regular game. If anyone liked Penny Dreadful or supernatural horror stuff, then you'll like this game. If you haven't seen Penny Dreadful, please go and watch it. It's really good, but there is some gore in it. Like, there's people maimed and flayed alive and stuff, so it's not for kids. Thoroughly recommend it to anybody that isn't too squeamish. And the only other thing is there's a writing contest for the Between on currently. If you want to do an incursion, and I guess we can have a link in the show notes. But it's on to the end of August, so we've got a bit of time. Should be excellent to see what the community comes up with.
Are you going to write something?
Yep, I've got the second draft of one done and some ideas for a second one.
Wow.
Ooh, nice. Sounds awesome. Yeah, so we'll definitely have a link in the show notes below.
See, the beauty of, because I have been playing and running for years, and even though you sort of change groups now, you can just rip off half of your old stuff and everyone thinks it's you.
It's true.
Yeah, so we got to talk about Brindlewood Bay and the Between, both Jason Cordova games. Unfortunately, I'm going to break that streak when I talk about the game that I want to talk about. But first, I'll talk about the games I got to play off the gauntlet. So I got to play Brindlewood Refuge, The King is Dead. It was a while since I played The King is Dead, so it was fun to get back into that. Also got to play Once More Into the Void, Apocalypse Keys, and we have an ongoing Blades in the Dark campaign on actual play, which is super fun because we're playing a cult. I have 2 crew members, so that's always fun. I love how dangerous Blades feels when you only have 2 people playing. Also got to play Vibe Check, which is a game that's currently itch funding, so that's really exciting. It's a really fun game that's based on the concept of The World Ends With You, that Nintendo DS game from a few years back, where the sequel's coming out soon. So it's a Lumen game, and I'm probably going to talk about that next time, but it's a really exciting system that's inspired by video games and then turning them into TTRPGs, but in a really effective way. It's super fun to play. So that's what I got to play off the gauntlet. On the gauntlet, I got to play Hearts of Wulin. I feel like at this point, Hearts of Wulin, I think I've played more Hearts of Wulin than Masks at this point, which is a big deal for me because it used to be Masks was like at the top of the list. So, and I got to play test Decline of Bleach and got to play Wander Home by J Dragon. That was super, super fun. Got to play The Between with Blake and Shane. That was great. And I also had the pleasure of running a game facilitator camp for my Ochre Jellies. Shout out to my Ochre Jellies. Thomas, Chris, and Nicholas. That was so much fun. Because of that, we got to play a lot of cool games. So we got to play I'm Sorry Did You Say Street Magic, Dogs in the Vineyard, and Alice is Missing. And Alice is Missing is the game that I want to talk about for this episode. Alice is Missing is an immersive RPG played entirely via text message. So there's no talking involved whatsoever. Like, you play the entire game through text messaging, and it's a strict 90-minute only game. Though they say 90 minutes, but like, it took about an hour for setup, and I don't know if that was just our group or if it's because we were playing online. But the actual playing out the story is 90 minutes through text. So it's a silent role-playing game about the disappearance of Alice Briarwood, a high school junior in a small town of Silent Falls. The game is played live without verbal communication, and players inhabit their character for the entirety of the 90-minute play session. And instead of speaking, they send text messages back and forth to the other characters in a group chat, as well as individually, as if we're not in the same place together. Chris from our GFC facilitated the game. Thank you so much, Chris. She did an awesome job. What worked for me with Alice is Missing is it's such a unique gaming experience. Like, I don't know.
So is this like Slack or Discord or mobile phone or any of the above?
Good question. So when it's played in person, people usually they'll message each other through their phones, and they'll change their names and their pictures and even so that you can get more immersed in it. When you play online, there are lots of options, but what Chris decided to go for was we used the Roll20 for drawing the cards because it's a card-based prompt-based game. And then we use a Discord server for the group chat and the private messaging. So that's how we decided to do it. So it still felt like, so you have the option of putting Discord on your phone and messaging through there. But even though I was at my computer, it felt very real because, there are times you hang out with your friends and you are messaging through a computer. But I did switch to a phone. I was so immersed, right? Like when my character was like, I'm going to go look for Alice, I switched to my phone as if I was going to go look for her. Because it's such an immersive experience. And there was so much tension, and it was so easy to just completely immerse yourself in it. And I think a part of it is that the game is so well designed. I was really, really so impressed with Spencer. I think he did an amazing job. So Spencer came on the show to talk about Alice is Missing about a year ago. I realized, I looked it up, and I was like, I had been wanting to play Alice is Missing for so long. I didn't realize it's a year. Gosh, it's so hard being really into indie RPGs. There's so many games. There's not enough time to play them. Yeah, so when Spencer came on to talk about it, I was already so impressed. But now that I got to play it, I really felt like the design helped keep the gameplay so smooth. The prompts were so evocative. The characters that you could play were so relatable. Even though it's just a card and just a few sentences for the character, but it felt like it was so easy to come up with a character, and I can see how it would change depending on who picked it up with other combinations of characters.
So the characters are partially pre-generated?
Yeah, they're partially pre-generated in that someone has to always play the friend who comes back to town. So someone always has to play Charles, and then the rest are options. So you can play the secret girlfriend of Alice. You can play the brother of Alice. I got to play the one who secretly has a crush on Alice and is good friends. And so we established that I'm best friends with the secret girlfriend, but no one knows that they're dating, and they don't know that I have a crush on Alice, which felt very high school. It felt immediately like high school. Yeah, because the story felt so real. It can be hard to be an adult and play as a teenager. I find that can be difficult sometimes, but Alice is Missing does an amazing job of putting you back there, and it just felt so effortless. I really did not struggle at any point to play the character or to... Because there are times when I'm playing Monster Hearts or something, I go, what would a teenager do? I can't think like an adult, right? I have to stop trying to be mature about this, and I have to make the worst possible decision, right? Is what I tell myself, especially Monster Hearts, right? Because that's where the fun of the game is. But there was something about this game where, because of the cards that were being pulled and where the story was pushing you and it being so focused on Alice, it was just easy to get into that mindset. It was really, really
Since it's
amazing.
Mostly talking, it makes me think this game would be easily translatable to other languages.
You would just have to change the prompts, I think, and then that's entirely it. So that's a really good point. I should check if there are translations, because that would be really, really awesome. So I got super emotional during the game. At first, it felt there was already the tension because Alice is a friend. My character has a crush on her. She's missing. But it just kept getting more and more tense. It kept getting more and more emotional because people went missing. We didn't know what was going on. There were these weird rumors. Someone was pretending to be someone else. And then depending on the cards you drew, because every time you go to a location to investigate, you can draw a card to see what you find. I drew a card where like there was a creepy mask, and another time it was a duffel bag full of thousands of dollars. Like I was really into the game, but there was like a small part of my, like afterwards, my designer brain was like, imagine how different the game went if we like pulled different cards. So you play for 90 minutes, and in the last 10 minutes, whoever's closest to Alice and on the verge of finding her draws a card to find out what happens to Alice. And so Chris, our facilitator, asked us before the game started if we wanted to remove any cards where Alice could be found dead, because that is a possibility in the game. We opted to keep the cards in, and like I swear at that moment I was like, oh my gosh, do I regret keeping those cards in? I got so invested in Alice. I have the biggest crush on her. I want her to be okay. Like I could feel my hands were shaking when I was typing. Okay. And it so happened that it was my character who was closest to get to Alice, so I had to draw that last card. Just thinking about it now, my body's shaking with the tense. With how tense
is there
it
a
got.
limit to how many players? Is it like only 4, or can you have 40? How big is the group?
So it says here that Alice is Missing is best for 3 to 5 players.
Okay.
I can see it being more, but maybe there's a reason, like because you have to split the cards across the players, like different players draw different cards at like certain intervals, like at the 60-minute mark you draw this.
Yeah.
And so what I'm less sure about is, number one, like, because Blake, you asked, like, how do you play this online? So it can be kind of difficult. We did use Roll20. Roll20 can be a little fiddly and intuitive when it comes to like manipulating the cards, picking them up, sharing, showing them. It doesn't always work smoothly. And so Roll20 doesn't have a good messaging system within it, so we had to use Discord. I do think it can be a little fiddly compared to if you play in person, but Chris did such a good job with the Discord, and it worked out extremely well. We had a out of character chat that we could always like go to if we had a problem with the rules, as few as they are, or if we wanted to check in. Still, if you can only play this game online, right, if you don't have the option to like play in person, I still recommend playing Alice is Missing. I'm definitely going to talk to Chris and figure out how to facilitate it online. I think it's totally worth it, because even though there was a bit of a setup, everything was so smooth when we actually played, aside from the Roll20 card stuff, but everything else was super smooth for the most part. And I think the last thing I'm not sure about is that the bleed is very, very real. So I felt it myself, but one of our other players was visibly bleeding during our debrief, and I could tell that they needed a lot of time, because like it was like morning for them when we ended, and they were like, I'm just going to sleep for the rest of the day as I just recover from this experience. I do think that it's something that I'll warn players about, that it's a very good game, but it's also something that's very susceptible to bleed. And so, and if that's not something you want to play, then that's totally fine. And I realized I should explain what bleed is for listeners who are not super familiar with it. So the concept of bleed is that it's harder to tell the difference between what your character is feeling and what you are feeling. You sort of bleed into it, and there's less of a border. So even when the game stops, it's hard to completely leave the game because of what happened during the bleed. For my takeaway, Alice is Missing is a truly unique experience. I would love to play it again. I can think of very few games that have moved me as much as Alice is Missing has. And I can imagine how each game can feel so different depending on the choices you make and the cards that were drawn and the story that came together, knowing that there's so many possibilities for what happens to Alice at the end and what happens to you as well is really fascinating. I can see how this is extremely replayable. My last point is that I'm just so grateful for such beautifully designed games and the experiences they can create. The game really, really touched my heart, and I wish I had the proper words to express how special it is. Like, I tried as much as possible, but I don't think I got it across really. And I felt cared for the entire time. I could really tell that the design cared about my experience and what it would be like for me. So between the design of the game and Chris's facilitation of it, I just had such an awesome time. So can't wait to try it again. So that was what we played, dear listeners. And so now we're going to get into our second segment.
Can you hear the footsteps in the shadows? Can you smell the metal tang of blood on the air? Can you feel the veil between worlds slipping away with each heartbeat? The Between is here. The Between is a tabletop role-playing game about a group of mysterious monster hunters in Victorian-era London. These hunters learn about monsters and killers throughout the city and conduct investigations in order to neutralize them. Over time, they become aware of the plans of a criminal mastermind who is pulling the strings behind the scenes. They will eventually be forced to confront this mastermind in order to save Queen and Country. The Between is directly inspired by the TV show Penny Dreadful, but also takes inspiration from British horror classics, the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, pulp-era media, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and from Hell. It's powered by the Apocalypse and uses the mystery system from our hit game Brindlewood Bay. The Between comes with a 129-page rulebook, 7 playbooks, 10 scenarios or threats, a mastermind campaign sheet, reference sheets, and a supplement called London at Night, the Unseen. The Between PDF is available now on the Gauntlet Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/gauntlet. The Between will be available on DriveThruRPG starting June 14th.
Listeners, in our second segment, Blake will be talking about a topic of his choice. So, Blake, what did you want to talk about today?
Yeah, I've been enjoying preparation. I know sometimes a dirty word in indie circles, but I've been enjoying making, sort of notes or quests and missions and stuff for a variety of games. But it's been good because I'm doing a bunch of different games. If I think of an idea, I'm like, does this work in this game? No. What about this game? Yes, it does if we tweak it. And nothing's wasted. I just expose myself to a variety of music and media and just let the inspiration come and note everything down I can.
Mm-hmm.
The PBTA games I sort of play to see what happens. It's generally, I'll map out 5 events, thinking 2 or 3 of them might be used and the other 2 may not, or I have to shuffle around the order, and that's fine. It's been stuff I've stashed away and used 2 years later, and that's fine. It's never wasted, but it's just been fun creating them, making sure that the games are dynamic, but also I've also been working on stuff for Trophy and The Between, which is very different to. There's a much more sort of structured play than PBTA, and that's in no way criticism. It's good having that framework of we need these sort of events sequences to go through. So people always say, it's a slog to do preparation, but I've been enjoying it. I'll whack on my disco playlist and groove around while I'm chewing around the ideas in my head. It's been fun. I don't know, do you find preparation enjoyable at all? I mean, I do, but...
I definitely do. I mean, I am relatively new to indie games. Like, I haven't been playing indie games for that long. Before that, my only gaming experience was 5e. And there was a point where, 5e wasn't really satisfying for me anymore. But when I, read, games like Monster Hearts or Apocalypse World, I wanted to run them, but I was like, but what am I going to do with all my time if I'm not, doing hours of prep for this game?
What do I do with all this time?
Obviously, it turns out that what you do is play more games, but I did, it was a real mental leap to get there, because I think that for a lot of people who run more trad games, prep is part of the, what's exciting about it, that sort of lonely, fun aspect of figuring things out.
The solo game part, right? For me, I don't miss the indie prep only because I struggle with math. And so, and also because when I play a game, it was so hard to, and I'm talking about running from an adventure. So if I was running from an adventure, I would so often go off script that it would become useless to me. But that's not the same as making your own prep, right? So I would prep, but even then I would go off script from what I prepped. So I would defeat myself in that way. And so it was more difficult. It's easier for me as a GM to be intuitive on the spot. And that's why I naturally gravitated towards PBTA, because it was easier to be intuitive and just make up things. I like having a poker face and just pretending that I prep stuff all along. But aside from that, I still do like to prep. When I'm running masks or something, I'll have a few ideas, these are events that could pop up if I run out of things to do, or these are things that can happen if I want to throw a wrench into the character's plans. Whenever I would run masks, for example, I'd have a 1 to 2 pages of characters or things that could happen, or just remind me of what I did. So the thing is, though, because of this, I spend little to no time prepping. But then afterwards, I have to write down all the mysterious stuff I said, all the revelations I threw out there, all the twists and turns, because I won't remember because I just said it in the moment. So that's what I have to do. I don't have prep, but I have like after work that I have to do.
Yeah, one thing I really appreciate about the Gauntlet and the Gauntlet practice of recording the sessions is that I am terrible at taking notes afterwards. And often my actual prep is like frantically trying to find the spot in that YouTube video where like the important detail was so I can bring it back today.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh my gosh. I started doing that consciously where at the end of a session, I will sort of start to pull it off towards a huge cliffhanger, but briefly summarize certain important things that we were doing so that when I rewatch the video, I just go to the last part to remember the most important things.
Clever.
So.
When I say prepping, I'm not talking about pages and pages. It might just be werewolf attacks in park, other animals nearby, attacks are getting closer to PC3's house, and that's it.
Yeah.
Because it's only 3 lines, but there's a lot of ways that can go. But that still gives me an idea for an ongoing thing that's going to happen. And no matter what they do, I'm like, okay, this is when I can weave this bit in. Yeah, it is prep because I'm thinking with what's coming, but I'm not doing 20 pages for a session. It's like 2 at the most.
Yeah, exactly. Same. But what I do consider prep in a way is, for example, if I'm going to run a Hearts of Wooland game, then I'll watch a wuxia show.
Yeah,
right?
that's
like
the
I watch
the best prep.
But I feel it's super helpful because it helps you as a GM to go like to be more familiar with the genre, or to know what happens on a miss, what happens on a complicated success. It gets to the point where when I'm watching a TV show now or a movie, I could go, oh, that's a miss. Oh, I see. They rolled a 7 there.
Yeah. But genre saturation is definitely a fun part of prep.
Yeah.
It helps you envision what's happening. It's great.
Blake, I was interested, you said that you get a lot of your ideas or some of your ideas from music. Could you, I'm interested to hear more about how that works for you.
It may just be lyrics in a song or even the titles of a song, and I'm like, what if I take those 3 lines or those 3 song titles and I'm going to mash them into an encounter or even an entire adventure.
Ooh,
and sometimes it works, but sometimes it doesn't. You can do the same with Magic the Gathering. You just go 5 cards, bang, bang, bang. Okay, how can I weave these into an encounter or an adventure? And you might have to shuffle around the order or whatever. You might get 3 good ones out of 5, the other 2 don't work at all. But and again, you might stash one for a year's time until it fits that game. But yeah, you got to keep your mind open, and when something happens, just write it down.
Right.
I watch David Attenborough, and I see a scene, and I'm like, pause, write something down, because just that location or that 2 creatures interacting is going, oh, this is a great encounter, and I just stash it, categorize it for later, and then, weave it together.
Yeah, like when I watch something and there's a really good plot twist or something really harrowing or unexpected happens to the characters, I go, okay, noted, this hard move. I'm putting it in my repertoire and I'm going to pull it out as needed later down the line. I do have one other form of prep, which I do every so often, is I draw a few tarot cards or a tarot card before a game, just to keep in mind possible themes or what to push towards. But I love tarot cards.
Full spread or just the major?
Ooh, the full spread, yeah, because that's a good question. So for the tarot nerds out there, because if I pull a lot of major arcana cards, and I know, ooh, this is probably going to be a very intense thematic session. But if it's more a minor arcana set of cards, I only pick 1 to 3 at the most before a game. But if it's all minor arcana, then I know, oh, okay, this is very flexible. This energy that's present here in the cards, I shouldn't hold on to it too tightly, versus if it's a major arcana.
So you're not doing the Celtic Cross or anything, you're just doing 3 random cards.
So I have 3 random cards. The first one is the general energy of the session. The second card is what I should focus on as a GM. And the third card is what I should avoid as a GM.
Oh, that's so interesting. I'm going to try that.
Just to keep that in mind.
I just started running the Yellow King RPG, which is a little more sort of trad than anything I've run for a while, and definitely requires more conventional prep, at least somewhat. And what it reminded me of is that I just always forget something really obvious. The players make a choice that in hindsight was the most obvious thing. Of course they were going to do that. And I had not thought about it for 1 second, and they were just scrambling to improvise something anyway. Do either of you have any tips on trying to successfully anticipate the obvious things that your players might do?
Oh gosh, no. That always goes backwards for me. How about you, Blake?
Yeah, I generally think this is going to be a car chase, or this is going to be a find who's been robbing the homes, or whatever it is. And I just put down 3 most likely responses, like if they're going to do a stakeout, do this. If they're going to check for like CSI Forensic it up, check for this. And if they're going to go and talk to people, give this response. It doesn't cover everything, but the 3 most logical and predictable sort of responses to what they need to do just gives you a parameter to work with.
Yeah.
Right. Listeners, in our final segment, each of us talks about something which is creating joy for us right now. I'm going to start with Shane. Shane, what is giving you life?
I'm going to start with Ingrid Bergman is giving me life. Last weekend, I got to see Notorious at a local cinema. That's my favourite Alfred Hitchcock movie, and Ingrid Bergman is just incredible in it. If people don't know, I really recommend it. It has a plot that's basically constructed entirely out of jealousy, glamour, and the fragile egos of weak men. It is an absolute delight.
Wow.
Ingrid Bergman is fantastic
Sounds
in it.
good.
The next day, I went to get like a burger, and what was on the TV in the fish and chip shop but Casablanca, so there was Ingrid Bergman again. So now this has become a little theme in my life. I put on Gaslight last night, just fantastic. So all of her movies, absolutely incredible. Well, probably not all her movies, but enough of them.
I know next to nothing about her. I'm guessing it's black and white, sort of 50s, 60s era?
Yeah, that's right. So she's most famous as the lead in Casablanca, but yeah, made a lot of other movies, made a few movies with Hitchcock. She basically destroyed her career by leaving her husband to have an affair with the great Italian neo-realist director Roberto Rossellini. She made a few movies with him, and later asked about her life, she famously said, "Happiness is good health and a bad memory," which I deeply relate to.
That feels so accurate.
Doesn't it? So yeah, if you don't know Ingrid Bergman's work, I think that Casablanca, obviously everyone's heard of it. I think it's an old movie that everyone actually enjoys. You know, it's not overrated. It is just really likable. Like I said, I think Notorious is Hitchcock's best movie. You're not going to regret putting on an Ingrid Bergman movie for the night.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I love that. Yeah, and so, Blake, what about you? What is giving you life?
I'm going to say George Michael's music.
Yes.
So I've been a fan of his music for about 35 years or so now, even back in the Wham days. It doesn't sort of matter what mood I'm in, I can always listen to George Michael. There's always something there to cheer me up. To me, he's one of the finest voices we've had in like 100 years, so it always makes me feel centered and it's just lovely to listen to.
Oh, that's absolutely awesome. For me, what's been giving me life lately is I'm not sure how long, like ever since last year, what people call it is like falling into the rabbit hole of VTubers. Are either of you familiar with the concept of a VTuber?
No, I have no idea what that is.
Is it the same as a YouTuber, or?
Yeah, similar, right? In that, so streaming is a really big thing where people watch people play video games or just hang out and chat, usually on Twitch, right? Where streaming is a really huge thing. But what started happening I think it started happening on YouTube, but is now prevalent on both Twitch and YouTube, is that there are people who do stream, but they have like these anime avatars, right? So they have these really complex 2D or 3D art pieces that respond to, they have some sort of like facial body recognition program going on. And if it's 2D, it's just limited to like mostly them just moving around. But if it's 3D, they can move their entire body. And so they create characters. Usually the very popular ones are like anime characters based.
So it's not like a cute character next to them. It's actually replacing them.
Yeah.
In front of the camera.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. And they have this whole like backstory going on, and it's this huge thing. There are like thousands of VTubers, right?
Oh.
And I follow like a few dozen, like, you know, but I'm still very new to it. Like I follow, cause there are companies that like, support like VTubers professionally, so they create a cast and everything, and there are like several generations, like every few months a new set of VTubers will come out. So it's really, really interesting. And so recently, one of the biggest ones, Coco Kiryu, who really got super big in Japan. She was also, because you get to tip these streamers, and so she was the highest paid one on YouTube for like several months. She was so popular, but she also reached out to the English audience because she could also talk in English. So that's what made it an international phenomenon, which introduced this entire English cast as well. And the reason why I bring up Coco Kiryu is because she graduated recently, which means she ended her VTuber career. And so it was a big, big deal. Like I watched her final show, And I liked her. Like, I watched a lot of her stuff. I would watch a lot of translations, like these translated clips of her work. But when I watched that final show, I got so emotional because all the other girls, all the other VTubers talked to her and how much she had changed the industry and how she was such a good friend. I cried like that whole 2 hours. I just went through like all the tissue. Like, I'm so emotional. But Coco Kiryu was really special. I'm so sad that she had to graduate. But yeah, that's what's been giving me life lately. VTubers on YouTube.
Amazing.
Listeners, that's our show. Thank you so much for listening and hanging out with us. The Gauntlet Podcast is a production of The Gauntlet. We have an online gaming calendar, the Gauntlet Calendar, where folks can sign up. If you've enjoyed the show, consider supporting our Patreon at patreon.com/gauntlet. That supports everything we do, including our network of podcasts like this one, and our magazine Codex. You can find out more about all of that at gauntlet-rpg.com. You can also reach us on Twitter at GauntletRPG, or on Facebook at the Gauntlet.rpg group. Also, please, dear listeners, consider rating and reviewing our show. It really does help us out a lot. Please help us defeat the Eldritch algorithm and get us out there, please. Thank you so much, Blake, for joining us. It was fantastic having you with us.
Yeah, thanks, Blake.
It's good talking to you all.
And Shane, thank you so much for being my wonderful sparkling co-host.
Oh, thank you, Jamie. It's been a delight.
And so, listeners, we'll see you next time. Thank you.